Can you hear me okay?
I can, Titus. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, I can.
Awesome.
Bear with me 1 second while I resume. Well, excellent. Well, welcome to the Glow Show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and all the way from the UK. What time is it over there?
It's 10 p.m., just after.
Well, I appreciate you staying up past my bedtime.
That's all right. You're more than welcome.
Well, excellent. So I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you sharing your story with the Glow and the audience here. And tell us a little bit about your history. Tell us a little bit about your story.
So my background, I had a fairly successful corporate career. I was traditionally in sales and business development, and kind of grew, climbed the corporate ladder, if you like, became a national sales manager, ran a team of salespeople up and down the country, 7-figure accounts, if you like, and all the trappings that went with it: company car, expense accounts. So on the outside, I had what appeared to be a successful career and the sorts of things that people aspire to, but I didn't really feel like that. There was a couple of things I think that if I look back, I couldn't use those words to describe it then. But looking back, one was that I never really felt good enough. I always, this phrase of imposter syndrome that's talked about a lot now, but wasn't, then. I felt like that, like someone was going to find me out in some way, shape, or form. I wasn't quite as good as people thought I was. That was the first thing. And the second thing was that in order for me to feel good enough, I realized that what I was doing was what I call when then mentality. So I just kept looking for, well, when I've done this, then I'll feel good enough, then I'll feel successful, then I'll be happy. And it just kind of progressed. I realized that every time I achieved something, I didn't feel any different. And it was like, well, okay, maybe it's because I need this now. I need to go after this. So I just kept chasing one thing after another. And that kind of culminated in reaching, at one of the heights of my corporate career and still feeling the same. I kind of decided that, okay, maybe what's missing is that if I did this for myself, so if I left the corporate world and went into business for myself and had similar success, then I would be good enough. Then I'd prove how successful I was and I'd be happy. And so I left the corporate world in the early 2000s and set up a real estate business, a property business here in the UK with my wife. And for, between early 2000s and 2007, we grew that to multi-6-figure business, staring at kind of, 7 figures and beyond, and what that might do for our life and our future for our family. And then 2008 came around, and nobody foresaw what that was gonna do to the world. A little bit like what happened in 2020 as well. But and over 2008 and 2009, we had a really, really difficult year and a bit. Both from a financial perspective, but more importantly from the business perspective. The way that things were happening in the UK and that in that industry, in the marketplace, because of the kind of financial situation, we had lots of organizations that we worked in partnership with, financial institutions, some of the big banks, etc., who were withdrawing from the marketplace. So they were pulling back, retreating from the marketplace, anything that they perceived to have some level of risk associated to it. And property and development in those times was perceived to have that level of risk. So we were fighting two sides. We were fighting organizations effectively where we had lines of credit that contact us to say, well, your line of credit ends today. There's no more. So that was one aspect. But the other aspect was we were also being contacted by organizations that we did have lines of credit with outstanding facilities, who were saying, well, we want it back. And like not in 6 months or a year or 2 years, like by 5 o'clock on Friday, for example. And that meant that we were having to try and, in order to do that, we were having to realize some of the assets that we had that we were under development. But obviously in the world of development, you don't realize the asset until it's completed. It doesn't have value until it's finished. And so, we were trying to, explain that, but it didn't really make any difference to them. They weren't that interested. And so they were willing to realize the asset only for what they was outstanding to them, which meant that anything that we'd invested was lost. And that put us under real pressure over that year, to the point where we lost that business at the end of 2009. We lost a few other things that year as well, but that in particular. And I made a decision at the end of 2009, which was that I think we could probably ride this out and survive. So I think what I'll do is I'll go back into the corporate world. So I'll go and get a job, and we'll kind of ride this out for the next few years, or however long it is, and we'll see where it takes us. So that was our plan. I discussed it with my wife, and she agreed that was the best thing to do. And so in early 2010, I started to look for opportunities to get back into the corporate world. And then in March of that year, my wife, myself, and my youngest son, we were involved in a car accident, quite a serious one. So serious, in fact, that the road where the accident occurred was closed for 5 hours, and it took 2 hours to cut us from the vehicle. And the first responders on the scene that day, we've spoken to them since. They were amazing people, but they openly said, a few of them in particular, that when they arrived at the scene, their instant reaction was nobody survived in that vehicle. We did obviously survive. But the kind of follow on from that was twofold. First of all, my plans of going back into the corporate world were virtually zero. I couldn't drive, I couldn't work physically, so the recovery from the physical injuries for 7 or 8 months beyond that. But I think the biggest thing for me was more around my kind of mental health and the way I was feeling. So 2 things I think really happened. One was that the self-doubt that I'd felt previously, it kind of really reared its head in those times. I was struggling with why it happened to me. The reason we're in this situation is it's my fault. Maybe if I was better, we wouldn't be in this situation. So there was that side of it. But then there was also the side that I think that, as men in particular, not just for men, but in men in particular, we're conditioned that, we're the breadwinners, we're the head of the family, and we should be providing and supporting, but also that we're not supposed to kind of struggle. We're not supposed to be talking about struggling in our emotions and how difficult things are. So I didn't do any of that. I kept it to myself, but it was really tough. And I talk about it being like a downward spiral. And that as we approached the back end of that year in December, a couple of weeks before Christmas, facing a Christmas where we'd had to already make some other tough decisions. So, that because we were unable to work, we'd had another 8 or 9 months of just continuous outgoings with no revenue streams coming in. I ended up personally bankrupt that year. And I think that, and facing a Christmas in that situation for the first time in a long time, I kind of got to a point where I didn't think there was anywhere else to go. I talk about this day a lot. I'd say I got up one morning and I'd said to my wife that I needed to go and get some fresh air. I wanted to go for a walk and clear my head and just think about where we could go and what our next steps could be. That was a lie, really. The truth was that I left home that morning with no intention of coming home. I went to some woodland near where we lived with the express intention of taking my own life. And it was born out of 2 things, I think. One was I felt that, mistakenly, but I felt that my family would be better off without me, that the reason we were in this situation was because of me. And then I got to, I think, a point where I felt that I had nothing else to give, so the world would be better off without me. But a strange thing happened that day, and I'd say this a lot, that I couldn't tell you whether this happened for just a few seconds or a few minutes, or whether it was longer than that. But when I actually made a decision and said, this. I have no way out, and the only way is to end my life here. When I actually made that decision, I felt a real sense of calm. No pressure, no stress, no concerns, no worries. And it was almost as if, whatever it was, whoever it was, had given me a bit of breathing space and said, just take a while and reflect. Because that's what it gave me, really, was just, I don't know how long it was, but it allowed me to ask a couple of questions that became key to me. The first one was, I could have died 9 months ago in a car accident. In fact, I should have done, according to everybody else. And I didn't. Why was that? What was the purpose of me surviving and still having to go through all of this, only to end it here? Then there must be a reason for that. I could have been taken then and not had to suffer all of this. So why was that? And then that led me to a more important question, a bigger question about, well, why do I feel the way I do, and why do I do some of the things I do? And more importantly, why have I not done some of the things I perhaps feel or know I should have done? And it was those questions that kind of, for want of a better phrase, brought me back to kind of just search for those answers, really. That was what it was about. And I often say that, I had no intention at that time to be a coach or a speaker or anything like that. It was never part of my plan. And I think there's a lot of pressure that we apply to ourselves, and particularly now, I think as well, there's a lot of pressure that's applied by ourselves, but also by socially, by our the communities that we exist in, to try and find our purpose, what we're here for. I actually don't think we do that. I don't think we find a purpose. I think a purpose finds us. I think at the right time, it comes along and kind of claims you and says, this is what you should be doing. Here's the reason you're here. That's kind of what happened with my kind of coaching and speaking. It was never an intention. It was never a purpose of mine. I followed all sorts of other paths after that. But the one thing that kept me going was this idea of finding out about myself. And that led me to being asked, as I made some changes to myself, and therefore things changed around me, I then got asked to share what I'd done. And that was just from people that I knew, who knew me. Would you come along to our workplace and share your experience with some of my colleagues? Would you come to a networking event and speak to some other business people? Would you come to a school and share some of your story with some of our school kids? And that kind of just started me sharing my story. And then from that, people started to ask me or come up to me and say things that I'd said resonated with them. And did I think that there was a way that some of the things that I'd gone through might help them in their situation? And I started to share some of those things. And that kind of led me into, do you know what? This is maybe why I went through all of this, was to be able to give this to people who are also struggling in the same way. And that's kind of what led me to here, really. So that's kind of a snapshot of my backstory and what led me to doing what I do.
So are you ready to dig in now? Now that we've got the story and I've got all this juicy stuff, I'm like, man, oh man, let's go. I'm ready to dig around a little bit and pull out those gold nuggets, because like you just said, our story is not for us. It's our stories for other people. For and my daughter has suffered from being bullied, depression, suicidal thoughts. And I told her yesterday, I was like, God's got a big plan for you. She's 16 years old and she's been going through the fire. And when I say that, I know you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, okay. I'm gonna clear the air there for a second. Wow. So how long have you been doing coaching?
So I've been coaching now since 2016.
Okay.
So 5 years coming up. Yeah.
And what were some of the questions? Like you gave us two of the initial questions, but what are some of the other questions that kind of took you down the primary vein or road that got you to where you're at? What would you say are some of the key secondary questions that have brought you here?
Yeah, I think the biggest things for me were all about understanding my behaviors, if you like. So, why, and mindset latterly, but, why do I think some of these things about myself? So why did I think I wasn't good enough? Where did that come from? Why does that make me act this way? But also, more latterly, as I've discovered working with other people, there are 5 key things that I feel kill more dreams and businesses than anything else. You can take pandemics and financial crisis and all sorts of things, but there are 5 things I believe that kill more businesses than that, and they are destructive patterns of behavior from the individual themselves. No business grows beyond the individual. So procrastination, perfectionism, fear of public speaking, fear of rejection, fear of failure are the things that keep us stuck where we are. And so the questions that I started to ask myself were all around, why do I think the things that I do about myself? Why do I do some of the things that I do? Why do I act this way? And then more importantly, later on, why, even when I know some of the things that I should do, don't I do those things? So, when I'm working with business owners, as an example, the number of times we have conversations where a business owner will say, I'm stuck where I am and I really want to get to here. And my first question often is, okay, so, right off the bat, tell me 3 things that you could do in the next 7 to 14 days. They're not going to achieve that, but we'll move you in the direction of where you want to be. Tell me 3 things. And about 99% of the people you speak to could tell you what 3 things could move them in that direction. And my follow-up question is always, okay, so let's just do them then. And they say, yeah, I'm not doing them. Right. And I'm like, okay, so that's the crux of the matter. It's not that you don't know what to do. Most people know exactly what to do. It's just that they're not doing it. They don't need more information. They need to understand why they're not taking the actions that they know they should.
Are you familiar with Bob Proctor?
Yeah. I've done a lot of work through some of the stuff that Bob does, as well as a whole host of other people as well.
Yeah. I was at a Dream Builders workshop with Mary Morrissey at the beginning of 2020, January 2020, before travel was shut down. And she has a story, or her son has a story about his house. I think it's in Costa Rica. It's down in Central America somewhere anyway. And her question to him is, what can you do right now with what you've got? Right? Because a lot of people say, oh, I'll do that once I have this. Well, that is dependent upon this, and you don't have this either. So what do you have right now, presently, that can take you and put you one step ahead, one step closer? What do you have, and what can you do with it to get you closer to your dreams?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And that's, as a big driver for me, is that when I'm, particularly from a business perspective, when I'm working with business owners, is, what can we do to get you closer to where you want to be? What actions can we get you taking? And the reason I do that is because it always leads into the reasons why they're not doing that, the reasons why they aren't taking the actions that they know they are. And again, it falls back to these key behavior patterns. They're either afraid of something, or they're procrastinating, or they've got this perfectionism attitude to things, that they'll do it when it's perfect. And so that leads me into, really what my jam's become, which is just working on those key things, understanding where that behavior pattern is, what supports it, and how we can overcome it as quickly as we possibly can. Yeah.
So what are two exercises that you like to use with your clients to help them get out of their comfort zone? Or what are 2 exercises that you like to do with your people?
I think the first thing that I do with everybody, there's 2 things that I talk them through. One is a concept that I kind of developed myself, which I call the Jenga concept. So the wooden block game Jenga.
Yeah.
I use it as an analogy to be able to say to them, if you imagine that Jenga tower as a pattern of behavior, so let's say procrastination. If we take procrastination to be a Jenga tower, In the same way, the Jenga tower is built up of wooden blocks. The pattern of behavior procrastination is also built up of blocks. They're just mental blocks. They're exactly the same, but they're just mental blocks or conditionings. And mental blocks are just simply beliefs or conditionings that we've picked up and developed along the way of our life. And there's two things about that. One is that if I told the individual and I shared with them what are the, for example, 19 blocks that support that particular pattern of behavior, we could remove all 19 and that tower would collapse. And when it does, the behavior pattern goes with it permanently, because the tower doesn't exist and there's nothing to support it. But the other thing that I learned is that if you look at a typical tower, as well as taking all of the blocks out, there's probably about 6 to 8 of those blocks that we could take out that would also make the tower collapse, even without taking all the rest. And I do that because I believe, and I've demonstrated that each of us, despite knowing what the 19 are that support that behavior pattern, each of us has our own unique combination. It's like breaking into a safe. Mm. And one of the things I do with my clients is to say, I'll give you all 19, and together we'll work out what your combination is. What 6 or 8 of those 19 are the ones that impact you the most? Because once we take them out, that tower is going to collapse. That's what's going to get us into action the fastest we can. Mm. So that's kind of one exercise that I do with all of my clients, because we want to get the fastest results we can. So we don't need to bother about all 19. We just want to know what your unique code is. That's the first thing. The second thing is that one of the biggest beliefs that we have when we grow up, virtually there's not many people who manage to grow through from childhood to adulthood without developing this belief, and that is that change is difficult and takes a long time. And so when I'm working with somebody, particularly when it comes to talking about things like beliefs and identity, people say, "Oh, I've tried these things before, and I've not had the success." And so I use another concept, another exercise with them, just to get them to really understand how fast things can change. So we play a bit of a game, which is that at some point in their life, they had a belief. They believed in Santa Claus. And at some other point in their life, they no longer believed in Santa Claus. And the question I asked them is, between those 2 points, how much counseling, therapy, strategies, techniques, or NLP did you go through in order to change that belief?
None.
And so it's all about the way that we form the belief in the first place and how we validate it from here on in our interpretation of things. So those 2 exercises are the things I do with my clients to get them to see things in a real simple way, so that we can be as effective as we can when we're working together.
I was recently talking to this person, and a couple things that go in line with what you're saying there. And in conversation over 2 days, she says to me, "You ask better questions than my therapist," right? And she's like, "Well, why?" And then the other thing was, she was talking about why it takes so long with the therapist. Why is it taking what she's looking for to happen? And I told her, I said, I use words like quantum leaps and collapsing time. And I can collapse time for you, similar to collapsing the Jenga tower, right? We can move through things very quickly when we figure out that combination.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, you're 100% right. And that's why people have this belief that it's difficult and takes a long time, because often their experience is that it's taken a long time. So we validate that belief to be true over time.
Yeah, and it was for myself. I really do a lot of work with Bob Proctor's Stick Man. It shows that there's the subconscious and the conscious, and we also talk about the conscious being like 5% and the subconscious being like 95%. So for myself and what I do and things that I do for my own exercises is I look to see how I can get into that 95% right away and start doing the work in there. For sure. And just let that overflow into the 5% of the logical or whatever.
Yeah, because intellectually, and I say this a lot with clients, intellectually, if I ask someone a question, a good 95% of my clients, I can ask them a direct question about a belief and they will intellectually answer it and say, no, 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 that's not true. But subconsciously it is, otherwise you wouldn't be acting the way you do. And so you can intellectually say, no, that doesn't affect me, but actually it still does. And that was the piece of work that you know, as you were talking about there, that had the biggest impact for me in the shortest possible time, and has had, you know, gone on to have those impacts for my clients as well.
You know, when I'm in conversations with different people, you know, and especially if they're fairly new on their journey or not even on their journey yet, and they say one thing, right? Oh, I want this or I want that or whatever. And then 2 seconds later, their words or their vocabulary are contradictory. I'm like, your words aren't congruent. If your words aren't congruent, how do you expect your life to be congruent?
Yeah,
And so,
100%.
yes, I tell them, I say, your words betray you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, words and actions, and you will know from Stickman as well. But the problem is for most people, particularly in business, you know, we define everything we do by our results, and you know, the next logical step for most business owners is my results are based on my actions, and therefore if I change my actions, we'll get better results. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not, you've tried that, it doesn't work. You've seen the behavior doesn't change. The behavior doesn't change because we haven't changed anything at this level. And only when we change at this level do we change those automatically. So you're right, you know, people, their actions and words, you know, always betray them in terms of what they're expressing, when they say what I would really want. But it's also, you know, I've worked with a number of clients who they were referred to me. They're probably not they're probably not who come to me directly from anything that I say or do, but they were referred to me by other business owners, and a few of them have been what on the outside you would call as being very successful, highly successful business owners, um, who've built seven-figure businesses. They've got, you know, the lifestyle, the house, they can travel when and where they want, but they're completely unhappy and they don't know
Mm.
why. And it's because, you know, they've done what I did at the beginning, which is this when then mentality that I'll put everything off. And when I have all of this stuff, that's what will define me. That's when I'll be happy and successful, without realizing that actually, you know, it doesn't come at that point. It's never the end point. You're supposed to be happy and successful on the way to wherever it is that you want to be on your journey. And so, you know, it not only does their words betray them when you're working with people who are looking for something, achieve something, it also happens when people have achieved, you know, on the face of it, that they're still not fulfilled in that way either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's surprising as, you know, as you delve into the coaching world and have these clients and people that are seeking, they can't even look themselves in the mirror. Their self-worth, their self-image, just, you know, and they could be driving the nicest Mercedes or the nicest car, the nicest house. And yet when they look in the mirror, they're just so hurt. They're just so beat up. They're buried under the emotional things of life, the paradigms, all the crap from society. And really that's what I look to do, is help people uncover who they are authentically and start living the life that, you know, they're designed to live.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you know, this sounds a bit flippant to some people, but the world would be a better place if we were all doing that.
Yes, it would. I would agree with you. So tell us, what kind of impact are you looking to make? What kind of impact do you do or be in the world today?
So, you know, when we're working with clients, like I said, the key for me is, you know, we're aiming to eliminate those 5 key destructive behavior patterns, whichever one it is that they come with. Usually there's more than one, but whichever one they come with, you know, is to eliminate that. The program that I use, that I work with and develop with my clients, you know, we have a 6-week strategy, start to finish. So I don't want to have clients for years and years and years. My intention is that in 6 weeks they're free to go and do exactly what they should have been doing all along. So that's from a program point of view, that's our strategy. But my mission really is this idea that sometimes I think you hear, and not there's nothing wrong with this, but people talk about impacting the lives of millions of people and all of those sorts of things, which I think is an amazing thing to say and dream to have. But I just think if we were very specific, if those of us who are drawn to do this, are claimed to provide this service, if each of those people only ever impacted 5,000 people, the ripple effect of that would be billions across the world. And so I don't want to have an impact in billions of people. I want to have an impact in 5,000 business owners and entrepreneurs, because I know the ripple effect of that, not just from them and their family and the people they speak to and their employees, etc., but also their impact in the world in terms of how they give back from their business, etc. My impact will be in the billions from that, but I'd rather be very focused in what I want to do.
Yeah. In a book I read, it says, he came for one, and so I say, I will go for one.
Yeah.
And if I wake up in the morning and at the end of the day, I've touched one person's life, then it's been a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, I think that, I talk about this as well, particularly when we get to share our stories and things like that. You said at the beginning that our story is for other people, and I absolutely believe that. But I think that, when we get an opportunity to share our story, we never know where people are in their life, when we come along. And the reason for sharing is that we might come along at the right time for somebody else. Who knows where it is for them, but we might come along at the right time, and they might just hear one thing, and they might not be a client. They may never, come to a workshop. They may never communicate with us directly, but we may have played a part in their life too. And that, for me, that's the bigger purpose of why we do what we do.
Yeah. And I take no credit I take very little credit in what I do. And, last week I met, me and a friend were hanging out, and we met a complete stranger, and, 5-10 minutes later, she's bawling her eyes out, just because of, she needed that, right? Whatever that was, that interaction, whatever that was, she needed that for her healing or whatever. And it's a privilege. I count it a privilege on my side to be able to touch somebody's life like that.
Always. It's, I say this every time I get an opportunity. That's why I love doing these, whether they're podcasts or lives, or that's why I love speaking, is because I'm both blessed and grateful to have an opportunity to touch somebody else somewhere around the world. And it's strange, and I say this often about the way that we look at things, but in 2019, when I did a fair amount of speaking and workshops and things, and in 2020, when the pandemic hit and it all stopped, everyone was looking at, how do I change? How do we pivot? How do we do things differently? All of those sorts of things. And I literally just, some of the people that I'd already become connected with were like, you should speak to my friend. He runs a podcast. You'd be a great guest on his show. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. Introduce me. And that's it started. And I was just like, oh, so this just continues from what I was doing before. Just, I'm not doing it live anymore. I'm doing it virtually. But actually, we're having a bigger impact now because, we're speaking to people from all over the world. And it was strange. We were having a conversation with someone the other day about this idea of the way we look at things. And I said, for lots of people in our industry, who host live events or were speaking, March 2020 was probably a line in the sand. Lots of people will have been thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to have the same impact? How am I going to be able to speak? All of the events are cancelled, etc., etc. And yet here we are. I've probably spoken more times in 2020 than I had since 2016. With no live events or no face-to-face live events. But I have this saying. In fact, I posted about this the other day that when I look back, so 2008 and 2009, when I lost our business, there were businesses that were launched in that period that are $1 billion brands today. And it often made me think, what did they see that I didn't see? What I saw, no opportunities in that time. Everything was against me, and yet they saw an opportunity to build something, life transforming for not just for them but for the world. And it got me thinking. And I'm a big believer in kind of analogies to help people see things. And the analogy that I took from that was that if you imagine being on the start line of a 110-meter Olympic hurdles final, all of the participants at the beginning look up and all they can see are hurdles. The question is, are those hurdles in the way, or are they on the way to where you need to be? And for me, that was the difference in 2008 for me, and 2009. All those hurdles were in my way. I saw nothing else. And yet there were people launching businesses because they were just in the way for them. They were just on the way to where they wanted to be. They were just like, well, that's just something else we're going to have to get over. But I didn't see that. And, I talk a lot about this idea of just shifting that perspective. It gives you a huge change in what you can see and the opportunities that present themselves. And that's why I think what we do, and when we talk about mindset and stuff like that, that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah. In one of the books that you and I have read, it talks about when Chicago burned to the ground and everybody said, we're going to San Francisco for the gold rush. But one man stayed behind and rebuilt Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is that shift in perspective to see things differently.
Well, Mr. Dean, you have been a huge blessing. My heart is full. I look forward to having you on the show again. Absolutely would love to just continue the conversation and dive deeper and just touch people's lives and be a light to the world. So thank you very much for your time, coming all the way to us from the UK.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And as I said earlier, I'm both privileged, blessed, and grateful for any opportunity to connect with people, share some of my story and some value, because hopefully we like you say, we touch at least one person with what we share. And maybe we came along at the right time this evening for somebody else.
Tell us how people can reach you. How can people find you and reach you?
Yeah, so they can get me at my website, which is deanafox.com or deanfoxcoaching.com. And I'm on all the social media channels. My handle's the same on them all. So whether you're on Instagram, Facebook, or Clubhouse, it's at Dean Fox Coaching. And you can reach me on there.
Brother, you are amazing. If nobody's told you today you're amazing, you are amazing.
Thank you very much, Titus. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You have a great day.
And you.
Bye-bye.